So the ABCs of financial planning, and I know we just did an ebook about this a while back, and you had some really good information about what the ABCDE of
Yes.
financial planning stands for.
Yep.
So let's start. We'll talk about assets.
Okay, so the key is to look and determine what your current assets are and what those assets will be in retirement. So a typical asset people would think about is their home. So what's the value of your home? Perhaps you might have a cottage, you might have a business. And then what do you have in terms of investment assets? So are you putting money into RSPs, tax-free savings? Do you have a group retirement plan? And looking at all of those assets and how they can create you an income stream in retirement. Something to consider is a lot of times people will, I like the word downsize, but right size their home. So, you may live in a larger home and then your kids hopefully leave the house at some point. And when they do, maybe you don't need as much space, or perhaps you'd like to move to a property where maybe you're in a townhome where you're tired of cutting grass, shoveling snow, and moving to something that's a little bit smaller. And let's say you come ahead with some money from the sale of your home. How do you incorporate that into providing a revenue stream for you? So we really want to get an idea of what your assets are now and what those are going to look like in retirement. So looking and saying, okay, if you have surplus cash flow, where do you deploy that cash flow now? Do you put it into tax-free savings? Do you put it into RSPs? Do you pay down debt? Where does that money go? But assets are a really big part of what your retirement's going to look like, is what you have so far.
Okay, so give me an example. List out what would assets be. Let's say I'm basically 50 to 65. I'm on the verge of retiring. What would I use as an asset list? What would I look at? And what do you think would be considered assets?
So again, your house. So
Okay.
the value of your house, and then what do you have? What have you saved, right? So what do you have as tangible money that you could cash in over time to help supplement your income? So again, RSPs. Maybe you've had a pension plan in the past where you've moved the money into a locked-in retirement account. What's your group RRSP look like? Cash in the bank.
Right.
What's your tax-free savings look like? So all of that money, those would all be assets that you would be looking at.
Okay. Yeah. Would cars or anything like that? Like
Not really. 'Cause you're still gonna have
collectibles,
to
would
get-
those be
okay,
considered
collectibles,
assets?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, cars, you got to get from point A to point B.
Right.
No matter what. I mean, sometimes people will say to me, I'll share a vehicle with my spouse when I'm retired.
Okay.
Which is fine. Love my husband. We will never share a vehicle. I equate having a driver's license with independence. So
Right.
I'm always going to want my own vehicle until I can't drive anymore. So that would be something to look at as well too. So a car, it is an asset, but if it's not paid off, then
Okay.
it's also a liability too, right?
Like my father-in-law owns a 1992 Corvette that he kind of refinished to how it looked when it came off the line. He's been offered a lot of money for it from a lot of different Corvette collectors. Would that be considered an asset?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But if he's going to sell it.
Yeah.
So it is an asset. It's a matter of at what
Okay.
point do you sell that in the future, and then what do you use those funds for? So
Right.
yes, absolutely.
Just the reason I'm asking is we like to approach this as completely unscripted, unedited, unfiltered, and I want to ask questions that people might consider asking you.
For sure, yeah.
Right. So I know a lot of car guys, and they would probably be sitting there wondering, does my car collection or does my custom, we'll say 1956 hot rod or anything like
Yeah,
that,
absolutely. It's
be
an asset.
considered an
Yeah,
asset?
for sure,
Yes.
Yeah, because it's always going to hold its value,
Right.
right?
Now, comic book collections or
Yeah.
guitar collections,
Coin
anything like that,
collections,
coin
all those
collections.
things, yeah. But
Okay.
keep in mind, they're only worth what somebody's willing to pay for them too.
Yes.
So.
I know gold is really big right now. I keep getting ads in the mail about selling gold and stuff, buying people buying gold. So
I feel like that's been going on for 20
for a while,
years.
yeah.
Yeah.
So would jewelry collections, depending on what
Yeah,
the
but I
value
guess
would
the
be,
key
I
would
guess.
be, is that something that you're going to sell to receive some money from, or is that a family heirloom that you're going to pass down?
Right.
So that's something to consider. When we do an actual valuation for people, I just treat that kind of stuff as extra. We want to look at, because it's great that your father-in-law has a vehicle, but until somebody's ready to buy it and actually
Yeah.
give them the value, it's kind of hard to factor that into what your assets are. And
Okay.
even though somebody offers you the money, doesn't mean emotionally you're ready to part with that asset
Yes.
either. Right? So when we want to look at, when we do a financial plan, what the actual value is of your investments in your home, we treat those as extras for sure.
Okay. So vacation property, like if we had a
that would be an asset
cottage
too,
up
yeah.
north, all right.
Yeah, and I think the key too is how long you plan on keeping that asset. Do you want to keep it and enjoy it during retirement? Are you going to be potentially selling it? I just did a plan for a couple where they have a vacation property in Florida, but they Airbnb it out when they're not using it.
Smart.
So they wanted me to figure out, can we afford to keep this property in retirement? So we ran a scenario there. Another couple has a cottage type property on the water, which they'll rent out during the year. They have a secondary home on the property, which they'll use in the summertime because it's on the water. So factoring that into a retirement plan, looking and saying, okay, what do you need to run your current household? What do you need to run that property? Is that something that's sustainable for you to keep while you're working? And one of the things that we want to look at, the next one on our list from A is B for budget.
Right.
So what's your budget? What does it cost you to run your household? What's it going to cost you to run that separate property? Are you in a positive position cash flow wise? So are you coming ahead from renting out, say, doing an Airbnb property, or is it actually costing you some cash flow? And if it is, and you want to maintain those properties, how do we factor that into your retirement plan if you still have a mortgage on the property?
Okay, so B is basically budget, kind of seeing what's coming in, what's going out, and
Absolutely,
what you
yes.
can afford to.
And I always say to people, like most people that come to see me, they have an idea of what's coming in and going out, but we like to lay it out in a nice spreadsheet. I'm an Excel spreadsheet enthusiast, I guess, and It's nerdy, but so what we do is we lay out, okay, what do you have coming in, what do you have going out, and then we're going to project out and say, what is that going to look like in retirement? Because your take-home pay when you're retired is probably going to change, right? You're not going to have your regular employment income. Perhaps you're going to have CPP, OAS, and then how do those assets that you have, how are they going to generate you some income, say from your RSPs, tax-free savings, and then what's your retirement going to look like now that you're going to have an extra 40 or 50 hours in your work week left?
Okay. Now, when it comes to budgeting, and I think you probably have a lot of experience with this when you sit down with people and kind of look at it, I think a lot of people really don't realize where their money's going.
1,000%. You are right. That's why we do this exercise.
Yeah.
And I've done budget sheets where, at the bottom it shows, I highlighted in yellow, whether you have a deficit or a surplus. And most people will show, they have a surplus of $3,000. And they look at me like, Alin, we don't have $3,000. I said, okay, that means that you really weren't, not necessarily truthful, but you just weren't accurate in what your expenditures are.
Right.
So when we look at what your household expenses are. So if you still have a mortgage, property taxes, hydro, gas, cell phone, those numbers are those are pretty fixed expenses.
Yeah, they don't change.
They're not
much.
really going to change.
Right.
It's that discretionary spending. So groceries, I don't believe in budgeting groceries. You have to eat. I mean, you can be smart about where you shop.
Right.
But eating out, how much you spend on vacations, how many times the Amazon drivers dropping stuff off at your house.
The daily Tim Hortons coffee run.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of those items. So when you start adding those up, and I always tell people, there's no judgment on my part, but I want you to have the same lifestyle in retirement as you do now. What's the point in working hard 40 or 50 hours a week,
right,
and saving and sacrificing and not being able to enjoy yourself in retirement? So why we want to look is we want to have an idea. So the people that have, say, the $3,000 surplus and they say, we don't have that money there, well, then let's go back and let's really look at your budget and really look at how much you're spending on dinners out. I've had couples say, we spend $200 to $300 a month. Then they go through their credit card statements and say, we spent $1,000 a month last month.
Wow.
Eating out. Right, which is fine. But again, it's just being mindful of where those dollars are going, so that you can have that same lifestyle in retirement.
Right. Yeah, it is funny. I think that's kind of like a self-audit, right? Trying to figure out where your money's going. Yeah, because I find it like my wife recently went out to dinner with somebody that she works with that knows this lady makes quite a ton of money, but this lady had a conversation with my wife when they were out and having dinner about trying to strap for every penny and trying to figure out where everything's going. And my wife and I had a conversation when she came back home. We were trying to think, man, where's all of her money going? Because she's single for what, she kind of owns her house. It's like, what do you spend your money on when you're making a lot of money? And I think you've told me stories about that too, like with auto workers who make a lot of money, and then they come to you and they haven't put anything away for savings for retirement. And where did it all go?
That's the whole point of the exercise, though, right?
Right.
I've told the story, I think, before in past podcasts. I had this client named Mary, and situation where, you should have 2,000-3,000 surplus, and she's looking at me like, I don't have that kind of surplus. And I used to have an office on Walker Road, and I said, Mary, when you come to see me at my office, where do you go after? She says, Costco. I said, how much do you spend at Costco? Oh, I don't know, $400 or $500. I said, okay. How often do you go to Costco? Oh, at least every 2 weeks, 2 weeks, maybe more frequent. Okay. I don't see a line item on here for Costco. Oh, you're right. I said, what do you like to do in the summertime? What's your big hobby? She says, golfing. I don't see golfing on your list, Mary. How many times a week do you golf? Oh, at least 3. Oh, I would hazard a guess when a young lady comes around with the golf cart and she sells beverages, you probably have a beverage or 2. And she says, yeah. I said, do you ever stay for dinner after in the clubhouse?
The club.
She's like, yeah, almost every time. I don't see a line item on there for golf, Mary. Also, I know your husband's a golfer too, and he's retired. How much does he spend on golfing? And she's like, oh, I see where the $3,000 goes,
the
right?
light bulb goes off.
And again, it's no judgment.
Yeah.
Mary's husband was retired. She wasn't. We were just trying to get her figured out for when she can retire. Again, no judgment. It's just I want people to have an understanding of where their dollars go, because it doesn't take long. Christmases, anniversaries, different holidays that come up. You go on a little bit of a spending spree, and next thing you know, it all adds up. Or you go to Tim Hortons every morning and you grab a coffee and a bagel. Okay, well, that's $5, and that's if you just get it for you. But if you do that every single day, there's $20 a week, $80 a month.
It's a surprising, not surprising, but it's amazing when you start discovering where you're actually spending your money. And a lot of times you're sitting there going, gosh, where did all my cash go? But then it's the Tim Hortons runs. It's the extra things that you might pick up for your kids when you go to the dollar store.
Yes. Dollar store. Yeah, you go in for like 3 things and you come out and you spend $80. It's like, what happened? Yeah.
Mommy, can I have this?
That's the story of my life, yeah.
Yeah.
It's all those little things. Or different seasons. So, we're recording this in the spring, and in 2 weeks we have our pool being opened. Well, we have a huge pool cover, so we have the pool company open it. It's a big task. It's going to cost, I don't know what their fee is, like $300 to $400 just to open the pool. Well, then you have to buy chemicals. So, there's $500 or $600 to open your pool, and then we have to do the same thing when we close our pool. So our pool is a bigger expense. Right. And our house is the party house, so we just had Easter at our house. Well, our grocery shopping bill was a little bit more because, I think we had, 18 or 20 people at my house for dinner. Right, you start looking at those things. The difference, though, is I have a very detailed budget. I like spreadsheets, not to sound like a complete nerd, but I know where all my dollars go to be mindful. And it's just to be mindful to say, okay, at some point, there's things that you'd like to have, but it doesn't mean that you should spend the money on them. So I think the whole point of the exercise is to have an idea of where your money's going. And then you can make that decision where Terry and I have had weeks where we've eaten out 2 or 3 times, and that's not the norm. But for whatever circumstances, like, okay, hold on, let's slow our roll here. We don't need to be out for dinner as much as we are.
All right, so what's C stand for? You got the A and the B?
Yeah, so C is choose. So what are you going to choose to spend your time on when you're retired? So are you going to volunteer? Do you have a hobby? Do you enjoy golfing? So golfing is going to cost you some money if you have more time on your hands. Are you going to vacation more? Are you going to spend more time in maybe a tropical location? How is that going to factor into your budget? And then how are we generating more income to help pay for those items? So the key is we look at the financial aspect for people, but then the key is what are your goals? What do you envision your retirement to look like? You're only going to have so many years where you're healthy and able-bodied to hopefully get around, and you want to really enjoy that money when you first retire. What does that look like? So we lay out a plan for people to help them.
Yes. But choosing and what are you going to do with your time when you retire? Because that's a big transition.
Well, and that's why the book I wrote is called Retire on Purpose. So it's like you want to retire with the intention of knowing what you're going to spend your money on, what you're going to do. You retire because you were forced out of a job and then now it's like, okay, I guess I'm not going to work anymore. We want people to be in a position of power where they're making decisions and they're leaving on their own timeline.
Right.
And the more that you can plan in advance and know these things, the better you can make that educated decision as to when you can leave and then how you're going to spend your time.
The more leverage you have, the better. Yeah, the more you plan, the more leverage you have. And I find when people find themselves working like 35, 40 hours a week, that's got to be such a huge life transition when all of a sudden you got 35, 40 hours a week now completely to yourself. What are you going to do at that time?
And people find things to do because our clients come in and they say, I don't, everybody always finds things, right?
Yeah.
They're always busy going here, there, and everywhere. And sometimes retired clients are really hard to schedule appointments with because they're, they're playing pickleball or they're in different clubs or functions or watching grandkids or doing something. So I think most people figure it out, but it's having that clear plan in advance.
Nice. All right, so we've got A for assets, B for budget, C for choose. Let's talk about D and debt.
Debt. Yeah, so looking at, do you still have a mortgage on your home? Some people, they're emphatic, they want to have their mortgage paid off before they're retired, which I think is a good goal, but sometimes it's just not a reality for everybody. So then looking at strategies for paying that down, let's say you're a few years out, then what can we do to really have you hammer down and pay off as much debt as possible so that you can lower your mortgage amount as much as possible? Do you owe money on credit cards, loans, lines of credit? How does that all coordinate with your assets and having a strategy to pay down the debt?
Nice. All right, and then E stands for what?
Empty nesters. So I would say 5 years ago, I would have the odd conversation with people about whether or not their retirement plan is affected by their kids still living at home. Now, I'd say the housing market has definitely changed in the last 5 years. I would say at least half of my conversations include, how are we getting these young people living at your house, out of your house at some point, or how does that affect your retirement? I've had conversations with people, and these are not necessarily super fun, popular conversations to have, but I have situations where, people have their 30-year-old children living in their house and their kids aren't contributing financially. And kids have good jobs, and when mom and dad retire, sometimes the kids are making more money than what mom and dad are going to make in retirement. Asking your kids to help pay some rent or pay some money towards groceries, it's not necessarily a fun conversation I think people are going to have with their kids. But if your kids had to go out and rent an apartment and live on their own, they're probably going to be spending, $2,000 a month?
Oh, rent's crazy.
I don't think asking your kids to give you $500 a month to help pay for groceries, to help for the increased cost of electricity, etc., is a horrible thing to do. If you financially are having a hard time sustaining it, or you're working longer to help support your kids. I mean, I have a 7-year-old, so, maybe my mindset's a little bit different. He's 7, I'm going to have to support him for a while. But at the same time, I don't think that parents should be sacrificing, some parents should be sacrificing as much as they are because they're not willing to have an uncomfortable conversation with their kids.
So I have found that a bunch of the short videos that we talk about this, about like kids that still live at home and parents that are supporting their 30-year-old children, are the ones that are big hits, actually, that people really watch a lot.
Okay.
So I've been noticing that a lot in analytics. And I'm just curious because I know, would you have any advice for anybody that might be seeking that on how they might be able to start that conversation with their 30-year-old children who are still living in the basement?
Yes, I do. You know what? I always tell people, sometimes there's situations where I just spoke to a client last week, and, one of the kids keeps coming back to the well. And I said, you know what? This is your money and this is your choice. But I've been doing this for 22 years. Can I just give you a piece of advice? Tell your son that you love him dearly, but, you can't keep giving him money. This grown man's in his 40s. Your retirement money is dwindling fairly quickly.
Wow.
Every time you keep giving him more and more money. Just say, you know what, make Lynn the bad guy. I'm the bad guy a lot of times. You know what, if this is an easy way for you to start the conversation, just say, you know what, I did my taxes with my financial advisor. We did a review on my investments, and I can't afford to give you any more money. So next time life throws something at you, you're going to have to figure it out. Mom or dad aren't always necessarily going to be there to bail you out. Same when it comes to rent. I went and talked to a financial advisor. We worked on a budget and we looked. And in order for me to be able to retire, I'm going to be short X amount of dollars per month. I love you. We love having you here, but there's a cost for groceries. Especially, I just met with a gentleman a few weeks ago. He has 3 grown children in his house that range from, I think, 29 to 33 or 34. So 3 grown children living in the house.
Wow.
And 2 of them have children that come to their house, every other weekend and a couple times during the week. So you have 3 grown adults and 4 grandkids coming to your house. That adds up in terms of groceries, right? So
that's a lot of mouths to feed.
That is a lot of mouths to feed. So I said, this might not be the most popular conversation, but this gentleman's also worked at a workplace for over 40 years. He's tired. He would like to retire. And this is a place where this gentleman's worked shift work. And so I said, you can make me the bad guy. You know what? We went to meet with a financial advisor. Mm-hmm. And in order for me to retire and to be able to, enjoy myself and relax, guys, I'm going to need you to pony up some money or maybe pony up money is not the nicest way to say it, but we're going to need some help. And, these are 3 grown children with good jobs. I asked what they all did for work. So these are young adults that are probably making, if I had to guess, somewhere between $60,000 and $100,000 a year. I don't think it's unreasonable to ask each of them to give $500 a month or whatever amount this gentleman chooses to help run the household. Because why would they ever move out? There's a large home, mom and dad are paying for groceries. Unless these kids are really socking away a lot of money and they're on a path to move out within the next couple of years, and it doesn't sound like they have. I didn't probe too much. This was just an initial meeting. We're going to do another meeting in a few weeks. But I think sitting down and saying, look, I've worked at this job for 40-something years. I've been offered a buyout. I'm going to take it. But however, in order for me to be able to have a sustainable lifestyle in retirement, I'm going to need you guys to come up with some money to help contribute to the household. And, put it on me. My financial advisor suggested that each of you give X amount of dollars. I'll be the bad guy, Right. So I think it's okay if you're watching this video to say, I spoke to somebody, I ran the numbers, and it's not sustainable for me to keep having you live in this household unless you help with some expenses. I don't think it's unreasonable to ask somebody to pay $200 or $500 a month to help cover off some basic grocery costs if you're the one fitting the bill. Or, hey, we need some groceries. Let your kids have a turn. Like, why is it your responsibility to make sure that there's food in the fridge for grown-ups? Personally, I moved out of my house when I was 21 years old. Right. I bought a house when I was 21. I bought groceries on my own, and and actually, when I was I started university when I was 19, and I lived at home with my parents. And I would go grocery shopping. I wouldn't ask my mom and dad to reimburse me. It's like, no, right. I'm at their house. I didn't have to incur any debt during university to go live in a dorm or somewhere else. I went and bought groceries, and those were groceries for the house. I didn't dare ask my parents for money. Right. So perhaps there's a way to have a discussion. Or I encourage people. We can do a family meeting. I have uncomfortable conversations every day with people. That's just part of my job. So figuring out a way to say, hey, we love having you here, but we're going to need some assistance with some of the financials.
Have you ever thought about maybe getting training in interpersonal skills and communicationships with the family relationships?
I gotta draw the line. No.
But you have really uncomfortable conversations with people and
all day I talk about death and dying. I had a couple here on the weekend where they have a son that's autistic and they have a daughter that's in her late 20s. And when these people pass away one day, the daughter is going to be taking care of the 25-year-old that will never be able to live on his own.
Right.
So I said, we're going to have an uncomfortable conversation. Like, this is how you're going to set things up. Hopefully I like these people and, and they're in their late 50s, early 60s. They're probably going to live another 30 years. So I said, this is probably a later issue. But, when you guys are dead, this is what's going to have happen. Like, I gave the young lady a warning. We're going to talk about your parents dying. It's a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But it's a reality.
But it's reality.
So let's plan. I have these conversations all the time with people because it's the people that don't have the conversations that leave a mess. So we always talk about leaving a legacy and not leaving a mess. Having conversations. I ask people, do you have a will and a power of attorney? When's the last time you've updated it? What do you need to run your household? I've had conversations with people saying, you can retire, but you're going to have to ask your kids or your significant other. Sometimes people are in newer relationships, somebody's moved in with them and they're still footing all the bills. Like, well, time out here. If you have somebody else that's living with you and, eating groceries and there's an expense there, then sometimes you have to have that conversation to say, hey, I'm going to need some help here financially.
Wow. So you pretty much just draw on all your past experiences when you have to speak to people about these topics and conversations?
Yeah, and my foray, I
Yeah.
don't necessarily love these conversations, right? But I'm a professional, and it's a necessity.
Right.
So I'll preface it by saying, I'm going to say something here that, might not be popular or might be a little uncomfortable for you, but this is what I think you need to do. Whether you choose to take my advice or not, it's up to you.
Yes.
But my advice would be that you have a conversation with your kids. Hey, I'm going to be retiring, and if you're going to continue to live here, that's fantastic, but we're going to need you to help pay some rent. And then I've had situations where people really don't need the money but still want to teach their kids responsibility. I have a few clients where they're actually putting the rent money away that they're collecting, say, $500 a month for their kids. They're putting the money into an account. So when these kids actually do move out one day, they have money towards a down payment on a house, or that money is going to go back to the kids if they can do it financially. Not everybody is in that position.
No, that's great. I'm just sitting here listening to all of this, and I wonder if the financial advisor that they deal with at banks sometimes have these conversations with their clients the way that you do.
I don't know. I think that's something for somebody to ask themselves. It's like, has somebody really had this real talk with me about what things are going to look like? Not just, hey, here's what your RSP's at. Do you want to add some more money? Okay, peace out. See you next year.
Yeah, I know a couple people that have dealt with financial advisors from banks, and basically they only hear from them when it's time to invest money. Mm-hmm. And that's the only topic that's ever come up is like, well, how much are you going to put into your RSP this year? Or are we going to max out whatever it is that needs to be maxed out? I don't know if I don't recall ever having a conversation with anybody where they said, my financial advisor told me that I should tell my kids to kind of pony up for groceries.
I mean, it's not my lead-in when I meet with clients, but as we uncover things, like I said, I know it's not necessarily the most comfortable thing to talk about, but everything is just getting so expensive.
Yeah.
Right? So, and if you want to enjoy yourself in retirement, that might be something that you have to do.
I think kudos to the people that are willing and open to have these conversations with you, and hear an outside voice give an honest perspective about their financial situation, about like, if you continue down this road, it's not sustainable and you're not going to have enough money to retire.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I think people need to hear that, and it's great that you're willing to tell them that instead of just going, you know what, give me your money and we'll max out your RSP.
And not just that, like I'm thinking about this one family in particular where it's like, okay, so your kids might not have saved enough money to get out for 5 or 10 years to move out of your house.
Right.
Well, are you going to delay traveling and doing those things in your hobbies and the things you want to do until your kids are out of your house and costing you less money? Like, how fair is that? As a parent, you've already sacrificed a lot. You raised 3 children, you worked shift work, you fed these kids, you put them in sports and everything else. I get when you're a parent, you always want to help your kids, but you got to draw the line somewhere where you say, okay, like these aren't kids anymore. When you're like, 18, 20, 22, to me, you're still a kid, right?
Anything
when you're in your late 20s, early 30s,
beyond 25,
now you're an adult.
Yes.
You're an adult. So, I don't think it's unreasonable to say, hey, let's have a grown-up conversation here and look at, what's your path? How long are you going to be living at the house? And it's different if these kids are hardcore trying to save and, they have a plan. But in the one family's case I'm thinking about, I think they're mooching off of mom and dad. And they let them. It's a matter of, hey, if you want to keep doing that, by all means. But, if you want my advice and you want to be able to do the things, what their goals are, because I ask people, what do you want to do? Well, I like to travel here. I'd like to travel there. This is what I like to do. Great. There's a cost associated with all those items you'd like to do. Where is this money going to come from? Because you could live for another 30 years in retirement and you're not going to have enough money to do all the things that you want to do at the expense of having an uncomfortable conversation with your grown children.
Right.
It's your pick, right?
Yeah.
This is what I do. This is my primary occupation. I've been doing this for 22 years. I've met with a lot of people. It's just a different perspective.
And I think your words carry a lot of weight. Having 22 years of experience, I'm sure you've seen a lot. And I think that's one of the most tragic things that could happen to somebody is working 30, 40 years and not having enough money to sustain their lifestyle in retirement. To me, that is just incredibly sad, especially when it could be avoided, and especially if it is your children that is the cause of you not having enough money to retire comfortably.
Right.
So anyway, I'm glad we're kind of talking about the ABCDEs of retirement and trying to hopefully prepare people for retirement in the proper way.
And we have an ebook that's gives you a little
Right.
bit more information. So
That will be located in the description of this video. You'll be able to click on the link and download the ABCDEs for retirement. It dives a little bit deeper into the topics that we're discussing here, but this has been generally an introduction to the ABCDEs of retirement, and hopefully giving you some food for thought when considering retirement. Is there anything that you wanted to add to kind of close this out?
I think the key is just starting sooner rather than later, right? So if you've taken, my philosophy is, I'll go to a seminar or I'll watch a webinar or hear a speaker somewhere. Take action within 24 to 48 hours. So like Glenn said, you can download the ebook, but take a look, what do you have for assets? Have an honest conversation with yourself. You might not want to have the conversation in the car. People will be looking at you like you're kind of crazy if you're talking out loud. But, what are your assets? Do you have an actual concrete written budget laid out? If not, maybe that's time to do that. See for choose. What do you envision yourself doing when you're retired? Give it some thought. Just dream. Let your mind wander. We'll figure out the finances later. But if, money were no object, what would you spend your time doing?
Right.
What do you have for debt? Are there some credit cards that you got to work on, chunking down the payment, the amount that you owe? Are you at the point where you're getting close to paying off your mortgage? What does that look like? And then empty nesters. Are there kids at your house? Are they going to be moving out anytime soon? Or maybe you have the financial capacity to help them with a down payment for a house to just, get them out of the house. So if you want to, walk around your house naked or whatever it is that you want to do, you have some privacy. I don't know, right? So I think the key is just looking and saying, okay, what do I envision my retirement looking like? And whoever your current advisor is, are they the person to help you get to that point and walk with you down that path? Again, there might be some uncomfortable conversations or maybe just need a different perspective. So
I think it's great having a financial expert to kind of brainstorm ideas with and to talk to about advice. Like life comes with so many milestones: marriage, divorce, sending your kids to college, maybe yourself returning back to school, buying a house, selling a house, buying a car, selling a car. Like there's all these
death
massive,
of family member,
death
so
of
many
a
things.
Family member. And I think there's a lot of psychology that it's locked up with finances and people and work. I mean, like you identify yourself through your job for X amount of years, and then so who are you? Who are you now that you're not working, right? There's also a social aspect. There's all these people that you saw for years, 20, 30 years that you've seen every day by the water cooler or on the line. Who are you going to be and who are you going to talk to once you're not seeing these people, right? So I think this is a good start, and it's a good way to build a solid foundation for what you want to do once you retire. So yeah, it's good. I think we can end that one here.
I think we'll do a whole other one on holistic planning and what they'll spend their time doing in retirement. That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, I think we got to look at that because it's a major milestone. Retirement is a major thing, and people identify themselves with their work. So who do you become now that you're not working? That's the question. Yeah. Follow us for the next podcast on that episode, on that topic.
There you go.
All right, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Have a great day.
Yeah, see you soon.